light and sound of God.
Our topic tonight is gifts stranger than fiction. And basically this talk is about caretakers. Gifts stranger than fiction. I've often said it's the simple things in life that are the most beautiful and the most important. Lewis from Colorado was to attend a business meeting, 2 business meetings in a town about 3 hours away from home. He was going by car. So when the time came for him to set out from home, he got in the car, and just before he got in the car, he said, "Oh no, flat tire." But no problem. He had a little tire inflator at home, so he took that thing and he tried to inflate the tire, but the tire inflator broke. Not to worry. He said, "No problem. I'll call AAA, the American Automobile Association." And so when he called them, they said, "There will be an hour's delay." He said, "Oh great, there goes my day." So he gets on the phone and he calls up the 2 appointments, the people at the 2 appointments he was supposed to have in the city 3 hours away. Talks with them. He says, "Can we make the appointments for next week sometime?" Then he goes back out to the car, and by this time, the tow truck driver, he had filled up the tire, and he said, "This will hold you now till you can get to a service station." So he said, "Fine." And then the driver started writing up the ticket for having made the service call. He's writing it up, and the whole time he's talking about his father. Finally, Lewis asked him, he said, "Oh, is your father still living?" Driver said, "No, he passed on." But then he started to tell stories of one kind or another. And Lewis figured, well, what the heck, the meetings are off anyway. My gift will be to this man of just listening, to let him talk as long as he wants to. And the driver began to tell many stories about his neighborhood when he used to be a farmer back in Pennsylvania, before he moved out to Colorado. And he told story after story about the neighbors, how they got along and all their different interactions and relationships. But one of the stories that particularly struck Lewis was one that the driver, Charlie, told about his father. He said way back when Charlie was farming, he used to raise buckwheat and sell it to the Pillsbury Company. This was a time when buckwheat was used very much by the consumer for pancakes and other such things. But as time passed, the consumer's taste switched to other flours, the lighter flours, like wheat and others, and buckwheat fell out of favor. And so Charlie, the farmer then, had to find some other cash crops with which to make a living, plus he raised beef cattle. So while all this was going on, he one day told his father, he said, "I've got this piece of land out there. I can't grow a thing on it." He says, "All it's got is briars." And he said, having to take care of cattle now and the other cash crops, he said, "I'd sure like to use that land." Father said, "Why don't you just sow some buckwheat?" Son said, "Buckwheat?" Father said, "Sure, it's good for the land." So the son looked it over and he said, "Well, what's the difference? Nothing I grow there, try to grow there, grows there anyway. And whatever does come up is unhealthy, doesn't have any value to it. The father said, try buckwheat. Nothing tames wild land like buckwheat. Just give it a try. So Charlie did, and to his surprise and delight, the buckwheat came up fine. And in the years to come, he planted buckwheat there, and then later he found that buckwheat did a very interesting thing to the soil. It changed its chemical composition. The soil became productive again. Lewis was looking at this story about the buckwheat, and he was thinking about his own job. He works within the education area, and he was thinking there must be a lot of buckwheats out there. It's something that has little value in itself, but it can transform other things. And he was thinking in the education areas, he said, if I can find the buckwheat that will transform some of the educators that I'm trying to serve in the school system, that would be a real gift. Or he said, if I can bring a better attitude to some of the public schools that I serve, this would truly be another gift. So he looked at all these things, and he decided that somehow he must look for the catalyst. So the challenge also for you, I suppose, if you're any bit creative or energetic, look for the buckwheats in your own life to transform something. Now this buckwheat is going to look useless to you, but there's a hidden treasure in it, and somehow, in some way, it can create a miracle with something else that is not doing too well in your life. So look for the buckwheats. Nikki from New York wrote to me. She explained that she's a property manager for a local construction company. She was busy one day. She shows the apartments, the apartment model to prospective renters. So she was in her office, and then one day she sees a car drive up, and it sat there for a long time. And then over the next half hour, she sees this man struggle out of the car and very slowly and laboriously make his way into her office. It turns out he has multiple sclerosis, MS. He could barely walk. His speech was a simple mumble. So she took him on the tour, and during the whole tour, this man was able to go only at a very slow pace, and it took him forever to say anything. Now, Nikki had looked at her watch before. The man had come into the office, and she looked at it and she said, plenty of time, because she had to pick up her son from school. And she just wanted to allow plenty of time to show, what models were available to this man, what apartment models were available. And so as the tour is going on longer and longer, Nikki found the whole experience a real test of patience. But the inner master, the Mahanta, came to her and said, just have patience. This will be your gift to him. And then Nikki remembered, just that morning she had declared herself a channel for the Ek, the Holy Spirit. She'd said, make me a channel for you and for divine love. Let everything that I do today be in thy name. Let it help others in some spiritual way. And here, nearly at the close of the day, when she was just about ready to leave, here comes the man with MS. And it's taking forever. But she looked at her watch and everything seemed fine. Everything was right on time. So she went through it, and while they're walking, the man had a chance to talk, and through his mumbling, she was able to get his story. Since he'd become ill, his family had lost patience with him, and the stress in the house, in the family house, was coming to the point where it was making his condition even worse. And so he told Nikki, he said, "I've got to get out of the house to save my life. That's why I'm here." And so when the tour ended, the man made his way out to his vehicle again and laboriously climbed in and then drove off. Nikki went back to her office, sat down, and just as she did, the phone rang. It was her son at school, and he was very upset. He said, "Mom, do you know what time it is?" If any of you are parents who've been late to pick up a child, you've heard that. She looked at her watch and she said, "Well, it's 4 o'clock. He said, "It's 5 o'clock. You're over an hour late." And she looked at her watch and it had stopped. And she realized then that the act had stopped her watch simply so that she would allow enough time for this gentleman to be able to unload his spiritual burden during the tour that she gave him. Because if her watch had been going, she would have rushed the tour and hurried him along as much as possible so that she could pick up her son from school on time. She found through all this that the act in slowing her watch was in control of all things. She summed it up like this, and I'd like to read this. "I'm so grateful for the gift of the Mahanta's love," she said. And of course, the Mahanta is the inner master, the inner side of the living act master. And she continues, "I think that people who leave act must have never really known that love. Otherwise, how could they ever leave that circle of friends?" There was an article in a West Coast paper, the San Jose Mercury, as a matter of fact. I used to read it when we lived there, before moving here to Minneapolis. It was an article with the title, "A Bike Ride Stranger Than Fiction." Twin brothers, they were young. They decided to go to one of the large parks in the state. It was a wild place. They decided to take their mountain bikes and make a 40-mile loop to go along ridges and up and down trails and just go back there and see if they could reach a certain summit. And then after they reached there, then head back to the ranger station where they had parked their truck. They went into the ranger station to check in with the rangers. They told them of their plan in case anything happened. And very matter of fact, the ranger said, "If your truck is still parked out here by our station in the morning, we'll come looking for you." So this was sort of a foreshadowing of what they could expect out there. So the two brothers, full of adventure, set out on their bike trip, roughing it, going fast, pedaling up and down hills, ravines. Now this park is a very wild place. There are coyotes, wild boar, cougars, other animals, birds, hawks, and all other creatures here, so that in the dark areas of the forests that are in this park, there's a considerable amount of danger. So they were going along on their bikes, and after a while they became very, very tired, and they said, well, should we press on to the summit? Will we be able to make the summit and then get back to the ranger station before dark? And as they were going along, they realized that they had overestimated or poorly planned their trip. The ride was a lot harder than they thought. They were near exhaustion now, and they still had a long ways to go. But they decided, yeah, we'll go for the ridge. We'll go for the summit. So they went up to this high summit, and finally, exhausted, they got up there, and as they get to the top, they said, wow, what a great view. Now we better get out of here. Because off in the distance, at the next ridge, they could see this rainstorm coming in. All they needed was rain turning these trails into mud. It was hard enough riding their bikes the way it was. And so the rain hit, and they're out there slogging around in the mud. Things got worse and worse, and finally they were exhausted to the point of almost thinking it was the end. But they struggled on a little more until they were convinced it was the end. They both fell down flat in the mud, just flat on their back, unable to move. They said, well, it's been a good life. You know, these are young men. It's been a good life. And so they lay there as well as possible, exchanging stories of the adventures they'd shared. They're going through the whole stories with each other, and then suddenly this old man stands in front of them. He's got a walking stick in his hand, and he's got an old rain cap on his head. But the most striking feature of him was this long white beard. The man looks at him and says, "What are you doing?" And the twins, they answered in unison, as twins often do. They said, "We're going to die." It was sort of said as a joke, but not really, you know. They thought they'd come to the end. Then they looked at the old gentleman and they said, "Where'd you come from?" And they still lay on the mud, flat on their back, looking up at him, too exhausted to move. He didn't answer him directly. He didn't tell him where he came from. He just said, "I am a caretaker." So they asked, "Where's the trail back to the ranger station?" His eyes had a gentle, compassionate look, and he said to them, "That's the way home." And just a few yards away was the trail they'd been looking for. This was the head of the trail. They hadn't seen it, but the old man looks at him and he says, "You guys are not ready to die." And so they all smiled at that, you know. So finally refreshed, they got up got on their bikes, and they headed down to the trailhead, which was just a few yards away. They stopped to turn to wave to the old gentleman, but he was already gone. When the two young men got home, they were starved. One of them, the writer of the article, he went to a fast food place, and he had 3 of their largest hamburgers and the fries, everything that came with it, stuffed it all down, cleaned himself up, got the mud off, and then he headed for his warm, soft bed. Well, then came a gift stranger than fiction. The writer had a dream. And in this dream, the stranger, the old man, the caretaker, appeared to him. And the young man says, "What are you doing in my dream?" He's very possessive about his dreams. And the old man said, "I wanted to tell you that you have more adventures ahead of you and to be thankful." The young man says, "Thankful for what?" The old man replied, he said, "You are a wild spirit and have a big heart." Smiling, then the old man continued, "Be thankful for every minute you are here." The young man, he challenged him. He said, "You mean wander the hills alone like you?" And the old man said, "No, be the caretaker of your life." So when the dreamer awoke, he was filled with this contentment and happiness that he'd not felt for a long time. The conclusion he reached from all this: we are all caretakers of ourselves and of each other. Take every step with grace, for life is a precious adventure. And most of all, he said, never give up. He'd met the Ekmaster Fubi Kwan's. Now, what's the purpose of service? So often you'll hear me say, soul's mission is to serve life. And some people who have yet to get more of the experience of divine love in their own life, in this life or some previous one, they say, how dull. Doesn't sound like a very interesting thing to do. Life comes but once. We should make the best of it. And what is this serve life, serve God stuff? Basically, it's helping people. It's helping them do the things that they need to make it easier for them. And in so doing, you are working for the Holy Spirit. In so doing, you are working for the good of other people. And in so doing, you are doing much good for yourself. So about the purpose of service, the Shariat Ki Sugmad, Book 2, says this. An ekist resolves to aid all sentient beings in reaching the Ekshar, the enlightenment or supreme consciousness. Ekshar is an ek term that just means a high state of consciousness. It's beyond cosmic consciousness. It's an initiation into a higher state of recognizing God's love. I know that many of you have traveled a long ways to be at this seminar. Others of you live right in town, and it was an easy trip for you. I think back to the early years in Eck, and even today, where some people have such a strong desire for truth that they will let no number of miles stand between them and the chance to hear it. I know I did myself, and my wife Joan did too. When we heard about Eck, that was life. Suddenly things clicked. Others, like us, had the same experience, but for some people the experience is similar when they come to a new church. A Catholic may become a Baptist, can you imagine? Or a Baptist and Anglican. Or a Jew, well, I was going to say a follower of Islam. Everything is possible. Because soul comes in a form, in a body, that is suited for its best spiritual unfoldment at that time. And to accomplish the goal of receiving more wisdom and more spiritual freedom, that soul sometimes has to jump a lot of walls and climb and crawl through many briar patches, because that's the way of it. So as we come to an end for this talk this evening, I want to thank you for having come to this seminar. And so my love is with you. Thank you very much. And I am always with you. May the blessings be.